specific people that you want to wait for?
I think you can start. It's fine.
Okay, so we'll
8 o'clock.
Okay.
So it's fine.
So good evening to everybody. We are very happy that we have Nechama Dina Spiero here. I think all the people here know who Nechama Dina is. Maybe some people don't. Nechama Dina is married to Rabbi Tzvi Spiero, who grew up in Amsterdam. So maybe that gives some more information from people who are not from right now in Amsterdam, but from before. And we're very happy to have Nechama Dina here that will share some, I'm sure, very interesting information with us. I think let's start to hear something about your family, your parents, your grandparents, where they're from, what special things passed their life. Bevakasha.
Okay. Well, I'll start with me. I'm born in New York. When I was a baby of a few months old, my family, actually my parents, together with me, moved to Atlanta. We lived there for about 13 years. After Atlanta, we moved to Montreal. When I got married, I moved to New York with my husband, and then 2 years later, we came to Amsterdam, and now we're here, Baruch Hashem. So I'll start with where we come from, where my parents come from. My father was born and raised in Denmark. His father escaped Germany before the war. Actually, he left Germany before the war. There were waves or signs of anti-Semitism in Germany, and he had the feeling that it was a good idea to move away. Baruch Hashem, he managed to get out before the war started. His parents left after him, but also before the war started, and they went to America. So he moved to Denmark. He married my grandmother there. The community in Denmark was a small, from yeshivish community. Of course, there was the bigger general community, and my grandparents were part of the small yeshivish community. There was a small cheder there. My father went to that, there was, I think in those days, they had a regular school where all the children went, and then there was a cheder, and my father went to the cheder. At that time, Rav Azdaba, who's now the Rav in Crown Heights, was living in Denmark and teaching in the cheder. And Rav Chaikin was the Rav in the shul. And my father became close to Rav Chaikin and Rav Azdaba. And when he finished high school, he wanted to go learn in yeshiva in New York. That was under the influence of Rav Azdaba, of course, and Rav Chaikin, who had a strong impact on him. There were some locals there who tried to kind of talk to my grandparents about, why are you letting your son go to New York, to Lubavitch? If he's going to go to New York, he's going to become a Lubavitcher. What do you need that for? And my grandfather, being a simple Pashut Yid, a good Yid, didn't know too much of different kind of streams or politics or any of that stuff. He said, listen, I don't know much about Lubavitch, but if he'll turn out to be like Rav Azdaba and Rav Chaikin, then I'll be very happy. So indeed, my father went to New York. In those days, it was very expensive to fly overseas, probably the equivalent of a few $1,000s in our currency today. Indeed, he became a full-fledged Lubavitcher. And I guess it was a good investment on Rav Azdaba's part, because later my parents became a chutanim with Rav Azdaba. My sister married one of Rav Azdaba's sons, and one of my brothers married a grandchild of Rav Azdaba. So their connection goes back many, many years. In New York, my father learned in New York. He learned Chazanis under Chazan Teleshevsky. He went to Montreal for a few years, and then afterwards he got married to my mother. So that's where my father's side of the family comes from. My mother was born in Germany after the war. My grandmother grew up in Hungary, and she went through Auschwitz. Baruch Hashem, she survived with 3 siblings. My grandfather came from Yugoslavia. He went through the labor camps, the war labor camps. Baruch Hashem, he also survived with great miracles. And he, with 3 siblings. After the war, he met my grandmother. Not exactly where and how, but somehow they met. And like many survivors, they started off their marriage in Germany, knowing that Germany was not the place where they were going to settle. It wasn't an option to go back to Hungary or to Yugoslavia. There was nothing left there. There was really nothing to go back for. So they had a choice to go either to Israel or to the United States. My grandfather had some relatives in New York who persuaded him that it would be a good idea to come to New York, and that's what he did. So when my mother was 2 years old, she and her older sister and her parents moved to New York, where they settled. Obviously, coming to New York after the war was not easy. Learning a new language, a new culture. Like many survivors, there were many, many survivors who moved to New York, and they settled in Williamsburg, where there was a very large influx of survivors from Europe, especially from Hungary, who settled there. And my grandfather had tried all kinds of ways to make parnassa, to make a living. And somehow they pulled through, and Baruch Hashem raised a family with 6 children in New York. So that's where my parents come from and where my grandparents come from.
And if I can interrupt you for a minute, I'm sure that maybe not everybody knows, but when people came to America and they wanted to live and have a livelihood, it was very hard to keep Shabbos. And that was probably what a lot of survivors had problems with, that wherever they had to work, they didn't let people not work on Shabbos, and many people needed every Sunday to find new work.
Yeah.
So it's a piece of history that, that's very important.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
Okay, so now, as you say, your grandparents from your mother's side, they were survivors of the war. From your father's side, they escaped just in time. How was it when you were growing up, and you were growing up in America? Were they talking about the war?
Yeah, so it's interesting. When I moved to Holland, and people here very often think that if you come from America, you never heard about the war. They just think, like, if you grew up in Europe, you know about the war, but if you come from America, you don't know about the war, which is totally not the case. There are so many people who grew up knowing about the war, with grandparents who survived the war. So yes, we did hear and we knew about the war. I remember hearing a story from my mother, how when she was a little girl, one day she heard her mother pick up the phone, and she heard a shout and a scream. She didn't know what's happening. What happened is that my grandmother got the news that one of her sisters, who she thought didn't survive the war, had survived. So that was after several years of living in America. that she found out that her sister was alive, and she also moved to Williamsburg, and they lived very close to each other. So we always knew about the war. We had heard about the war, though my grandparents didn't really speak a lot about the war. I think many survivors have different ways of dealing with it. Some talk about it, some don't talk about it. But one thing that stayed in my mind very, very clearly is that my grandfather, whenever we had a family gathering, whether it was a big gathering, a small gathering, it doesn't matter, he always gave a speech. We knew he's going to give a speech. And one thing he said in every single speech, again and again, that he went through the war, and when he was in the labor camps, he didn't know if he would survive, how he would survive. And Baruch Hashem, he is so grateful that he survived the war, that he built a family, that he has nachas from his children, nachas from his grandchildren. And that was a message he gave over again and again and again, this gratitude and this positivity and thanking Hashem. And he had absolutely no complaints to Hashem. There were sometimes grandchildren that tried to ask him, tell us what happened in the war. And he would start, and then he went off, and he would right away switch to thanking Hashem and being positive and looking for the good. That was really a very strong message that he gave over to us and to the entire family. And he was always looking to give to others. He didn't have a lot, but always to give to others and thank Hashem. So that was really a very strong message that came over.
Yeah.
It wasn't easy growing up for survivors and survivors' children. If you grew up in Europe and you went to school, if you survived the war in Europe and you went to school, everybody in your class was survivors. So you all kind of understood each other because you all just survived the war. Whereas, for example, in New York, survivors' children went to the schools together with the American children. And if you're just a few years after the war and you're in a class with American children who have no clue what just happened and what you just went through, which I think for survivors' children made it really hard. You see these families where everything is fine and normal and they're living the good American life, and survivors having just come, that was quite a challenge, definitely in those early days after the war.
Yeah, so your mother's family is built in Williamsburg?
Yeah.
And your father, he came to yeshiva to learn?
Right.
And his parents didn't come to New York?
No. In Denmark, the king protected the Jewish people during the war. So Danish Jews didn't suffer from the war like the rest of Europe.
Okay, so that's a very interesting, different view than we have heard until now.
In what way different?
Well, most people that we have had until now, they're Dutch themselves, with their own family, in Holland, the stories of Holland. And here we have a story from Denmark, which is, we know that Denmark stayed neutral and was a safe place for Jews. And it's quite amazing that your grandparents were there during the war and were able to live and not fear because they were protected. So that's very, very special. Yeah. Okay, so we got to the point where I think you said your parents got married and you told about moving to different places, but I'm sure there is more to tell about where you lived and how it was to live there.
Yeah, so I grew up in Atlanta, and the story I was told is that my father was a chazan and he was looking for a job as a chazan, and he placed an ad in the Jewish press. That's how it was done in those days. the first week that it was placed, there was no reaction. And by mistake, the Jewish press placed the ad for a second time. That was their mistake. And a shul in Atlanta, Georgia, responded to that ad. And that's how my parents, of course, always with the Rebbe's bracha, because whatever they did, they always asked the Rebbe for a bracha. They moved to Atlanta. And my father was the chazan in the Frum shul there. He also taught in the Hebrew day school called Hebrew Academy. He did whatever kind of jobs actually was needed. So he learned Safras so that he could check mezuzahs there. If there was help needed with the mikvah, then he would help with that as well. And actually,
so it's like
what?
Same kind of work that many shluchim do.
Yeah, actually, my father says that whenever the Rebbe whenever he received a letter from the Rebbe would address him as Eifsek B'tzorchei Tzibor. I mean, somebody who is busy with work for the Tzibor, for the klal, for the general, for the public
Community.
for the community. Yeah.
Okay, and how was it for you to grow up over there?
I have good childhood memories. It was a warm place, warm in temperature, warm in community. People were very kind, sort of more laid back, calm, relaxed life. I'll just share about the kashrus there. Coming to Atlanta as Chabad Hasidim, we had let's say, high level of kashrus, which wasn't self-understood in a place like Atlanta. Now Atlanta has a big, thriving Jewish community, big from community, not from, a very big community. It's grown by leaps and bounds, but in those days it was quite small. So kashrus was a challenge. We keep chalav Yisrael, which means milk that was milked, or that the milking was watched by a Jew. So there was no chalav Yisrael in Atlanta. In the early days when we moved to Atlanta, we used to have powder milk. So that was like, my parents used to get these packages of powder that you kind of mix with milk, I guess like the baby formula.
You mix it with water, I suppose.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, and that was our milk. Later, they managed to get like frozen milk coming in a freezer truck from New York. And later, my father was able to go to a certain farm that allowed him to come and watch the milking. It was a very healthy farm, meaning that the cows were very healthy, and it was one of the only factories or farms in America where you don't have to cook the milk. You can just drink it the way it is. So he used to go there and get big containers of milk, or they would bottle the milk there and he would bring it home, and then the freezer would get filled up with bottles and bottles and bottles of milk till it was finished, I guess, and then he made another trip.
I'm sure your parents had very big freezers.
Yeah, I suppose so. There was bread was something. There's different levels of kashrus and bread as well. There's the idea of pas Yisrael, which means that the bread has a Jew involved in the process of the baking, usually by turning on the oven. So there was a bakery there that was under okay supervision, but not pas Yisrael. So my father would go there once in a while to turn on the oven, and then the bread that was baked with that shift, he would buy a big amount, and that would get frozen as well. And meat would come from New York in big freezer, I guess on a freezer truck. And the meat and chicken was stored in freezers as well. So the freezers were full of bread, milk, and meat and chicken. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, a little bit as it was when I grew up in Holland.
Yeah,
it's not that there wasn't, but we also stocked up the bread and milk.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, and going to school?
Yeah, so there was a day school there. The day school was considered like an Orthodox Jewish day school. Most of the children who went to the school were not yet observant. I was, I believe, the only girl in my class who wore a skirt. Though I remember people being very accepting of that. Like, you know, everybody was, you know, I didn't feel like, you know, out of it, or, I mean, I knew I'm different, that I, you know, we live a very firm lifestyle, but I didn't feel like I'm, you know, cast aside or looked on differently upon. It was actually a very, very good school. I remember the principal very fondly. He was a very special person. I remember distinctly him knowing everybody, every child by name, greeting us with a smile. And he was, it was a very disciplined school, very structured school. Everything was with a very, like, you know, with a Seder thought out, which for a child, of course, is very good, because the more structure and discipline you can give a child, the, you know, the safer the environment for the child. And just an example of the structure, when we would arrive to school in the morning, you didn't enter the building. There was like a large schoolyard in front of the building, and all the classes would line up. There was a lineup every single morning outside of the school. We knew when the bell rang, you're in line. There was no such thing as not going in line, you were in line. And I don't know if it's done anymore today, but in those days, there was a big flagpole, and they would raise the American flag to the top of the flagpole. And then in unison, all of us would put our hand on our heart and say, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. Somehow that stuck with me. I remember before in Elul, the principal had this long shofar, and then he would blow the shofar for the entire school outside by lineup. And then very quietly, class by class, we filed into the school building.
Okay, well, maybe they can teach us something here in the Netherlands.
Yeah, it was I have fond memories of the model Seder, where they would set up the whole like lunchroom, like really like a Seder, and go through the entire Seder step by step. But yeah, that just, these things stayed in my head. They also, one thing that I found unique about that school is that all Jewish studies, there was a strong emphasis on Hebrew. So even if the subject being taught wasn't in Hebrew, even the stencils being given out in school were in Hebrew, which I credit my quite fluent Hebrew to that school, because I really learned my Hebrew in elementary school, which is just to show, you know, today parents are also protective over their children and afraid if it's a little bit too hard for them. But it just was like that. You got stencils in Hebrew. You had to write your answers in Hebrew. Somehow it worked. Somehow the children did it, and we learned Hebrew, which today I think a lot of people will be like, no, my child can't handle it. We can't do that. Can't make it too hard. They don't speak Hebrew at home. Somehow, I guess the structure and the discipline of the school allowed for that.
Yeah, very nice. And did they also have high school?
So this was an elementary school. It went till 7th grade. I stayed in that school till I was bas mitzvah. So it was a school with boys and girls in one class. When I turned bas mitzvah, my parents felt that it was time for me to go to a school, an all-girls school. So when I was 12 years old, actually my parents thought it's time to move, because it's, you know, what are we going to do once our children get older? We don't want to send them away. So they actually asked the Rebbe if they could leave. And the Rebbe told them, not yet, we can't leave yet. So, and the Rebbe told my parents that, you know, if I go away for a year, I'll be okay. So I went to New York for a year. And actually, I mean, I guess I was okay. I'm here. I survived, but it wasn't easy for me to leave home at such a young age. And at the end of the year, my parents asked the Rebbe again if they could leave. And this time the Rebbe gave them permission that they could leave Atlanta. So after that year, we moved to Montreal.
So the rest of your high school, you were in Montreal.
Right. Yes.
Okay, maybe important to explain to people maybe who don't really know, because you're saying that your parents very much asked advice by the Rebbe. For people who are not familiar with that, it's important that when you have a Rebbe, you have a leader that knows you, and that his neshama and your neshama are connected, so he knows what's good for you. And this is not the moment and the place, but there are thousands of stories of how the Rebbe knew exactly for everybody what was the best thing to do at what point, and how everything falls into place.
Yeah.
So for your parents, I'm sure it was that they needed to check with the Rebbe and get the Rebbe's brocha, the Rebbe's blessing, to make such a big move.
Yeah, 100%. And yeah, I think I missed out before. Actually, my whole upbringing was very much connection to the Rebbe, writing to the Rebbe. I remember very fondly whenever there was a Farbrengen, when the Rebbe gave a talk in New York, the phone would ring, and then my father would somehow hook up the call to one of those old, they had the old-fashioned record players, and you would hook it up to the record player, which amplified the sound, and we were able to hear the Farbrengen. And there were some really special occasions, which as a child was like super exciting, that my parents, or maybe the other shluchim, I don't know exactly who arranged it, arranged for a big dish, a satellite dish. Today we're on Zoom, like in a second we see each other, but in those days that wasn't the case. And they rented a big satellite dish, and I remember being in my house or in somebody else's house where a bunch of people would come together, and through the satellite dish we were able to watch the Farbrengen. That was that was always a very, very exciting, special moment.
Yeah. Okay.
Just a little anecdote. I grew up as a Lubavitcher, as Chabad. My parents full-fledged Lubavitcher Hasidim. So when my father would walk on the street on Shabbos, he walked with the traditional Hasidic dress, the long jacket, the kapota. And my father remembers how when he would walk in the summer, how the people there, the world was bigger then, so they didn't know what a frum Jew necessarily looks like. And I remember seeing cars slow down, roll down their window, look what's going on, who's walking on the street dressed like that on a hot summer day.
Yeah. Okay. I'm sure you can share with us some special wisdom or thoughts that you have learned from your parents.
Yeah, well, definitely a strong foundation and a strong love for Yiddishkeit, and the commitment and dedication to Yiddishkeit, even if there are challenges. Growing up, as a child, the challenge wasn't on me, really. It's usually on the parents. The food wasn't really my challenge, because that was taken care of by my parents. But still, that idea that you stay strong and committed, even if there are challenges in life. Definitely that strong connection to the Rebbe, to Chabad. We used to go to New York almost every summer to be in a frum environment and to see the Rebbe. And also the idea of growing and learning. If you want to preserve your mind, you need to keep learning, you need to keep challenging yourself, which is something both my parents live by till this day, the continuous learning in life. We're never done. we always have what to learn and what to grow.
Yeah. Okay, so you finished high school, and then I'm sure you went to seminary somewhere.
Seminary, yeah. Seminary in Israel, and here in Montreal. Then I taught in Montreal for a year. And then I got married, moved to New York. And after a little less than 2 years, we moved to Amsterdam.
So how was that to come to Amsterdam? That's a total different place than where you grew up.
Culture shock. Yeah, I guess it was culture shock. And I guess every place, anybody who moves to a new place has challenges and difficulties, and it takes getting used to. So no different. Yes, it was challenging, especially being far from family. And those days, sound like an old lady, but in those days, what's it, 28 years ago, phone calls were really expensive, so couldn't just pick up the phone to say hi whenever I want. So that was a big challenge, learning a new language, getting used to, coming from a city where you have an abundance of kosher food, then coming here where there's kosher food, but way more limited. Now I've gotten used to it and I don't really miss anything, but in those days it was limited. Yeah, that took time. But Baruch Hashem.
Okay. So at a certain point, I just want to mention it because I don't think you'll say it, but you had organized a few women's events, like once a year, I think it was, for a period of time. And it was, it was for all women, and women from the whole country would come. And it was every time something different. And I have to say, I always felt like it was so special, because when you came, you felt like someone put their heart into this. And I think that was you. I think the first one was a concert in Amsterdam Zuid somewhere. I remember taking a bunch of ladies from Den Haag with me, and we were all standing there and flabbergasted. We're all like, wow, who did all this? It really had made a big impression. And the impression stayed. It didn't become less by the next events that happened, because it was always, you got the feeling that, so much effort is put into this, and so much thought and love, and it was always such a big pleasure to come to the events that you have organized. But right now you're busy with other things.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're busy with, you're doing coaching, you trained for coaching. Could you please tell us more about it?
Yeah. So I guess a few years back, I started to get this niggling feeling that I want to do something else. I want to learn something new. I want to do something different, develop myself. I guess you can call it a middle-age crisis. I didn't feel it as a crisis, but I guess I got kind of that feeling. I wasn't sure exactly what. And then there was a time that I was listening to some amazing classes on marriage. And I felt like I really want to be able to help women to improve their marriages as well. What I found different about these classes, married almost 30 years, Baruch Hashem, many of the classes that I heard about marriage till then was a lot about be a good girl, do the right thing, give in, kind of just do it, and even if it's hard, that's what I had heard a lot of till then. And this was a lot very different. This was really from a very coaching perspective, where you help people to support them, empower them. It just came, I guess, kind of from a different direction. And I thought, wow, this is something like I really want to do. I'd love to help women to improve their marriages. And I just believe also that, of course, people will always say, you know, it takes two and both have to work on a marriage, which of course is 100% true. But I believe that as a woman, we have the greater power. Often we have the greater power when we take a step. Our input can have such a great impact. And I also believe that if you help a woman to improve her marriage and grow her marriage, then actually you're helping her to improve her whole life. And that really affects her children, her husband, her whole life in general. So improving the marriage is just, you know, it's really a life change for a woman when she's able to do that.
So your focus, I mean, did you start already with coaching? You finished your training?
Yeah, I did my training and I've started coaching. That's when I took those classes, that actually led me to start taking official coach training. So I did training courses in general life coaching and as well as specifically in marriage coaching. And yes, I've been doing it for a little while.
Okay, and how do you advertise? Because maybe people would like to know about it.
Yes, I guess it's been right now just word of mouth. That's how it started. And with time, I guess I'll be more putting my name out there. Till now, it's none. I've been just telling people about it and people have come to me.
But you're not booked full yet.
I'm not booked full yet. So if anyone wants to reach out, I'm happy to support you.
Okay, very interesting. I mean, nowadays there's a lot of coaching and therapists and everything around. Like,
yeah.
Can you say in what way you differ, maybe? What the advantage is on how you work?
On how I work specifically as me or as a coach?
Yeah, as a coach.
Oh, as a coach.
Yeah.
Okay, well, just to explain briefly what the difference is between therapy and coaching. Therapy is a lot more in general about dealing with conflict or with pain or with things from the past. There's resolving past issues. Sometimes a diagnosis is given in therapy or in psychology. There's talk about feelings, talk about how it's coming out in the present, but there's a lot more is kind of given over to the therapist to direct you, to tell you what to do. Just more dealing with the past. Coaching comes from a different approach. In coaching, we look at the person, they're not a patient. So in therapy, you might have patients, and in coaching, we have clients, and we look at the clients as being creative, capable, resourceful. They're whole, they're able to find the answers within themselves. It's a lot more future, like how are you going to improve your future? And it's a lot more about having a goal and then partnering with the person to achieve that goal. We look more for, what are the possibilities? What are the alternatives? We ask a lot of questions to help guide and support the person to finding their inner wisdom. So even if we'll talk about feelings, and there is some talk about feelings because, when you work with somebody, you're looking at the entire picture, but it's only part of it. It's not like the main thing of the coaching.
Okay, and I'm sure that you have like a specific way if you work with Jewish people, or isn't that not per se?
Way that I work with a Jew as opposed to a non-Jew. I don't know if there's a difference in the way I would work with a Jew or with a non-Jew, because the principles remain the same. It's just that me as a frum woman have my Jewish hashkafas, which influence who I am and influence how I'll work with somebody, whatever level of Judaism they're holding or whether they're Jewish or not.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, but it's still someone who is Jewish could have benefit from going to a person like you, because I suppose that because it's still more like you can recognize each other, let's say.
Yeah, I can have more of an understanding where they're coming from and what they're doing,
Right.
as opposed to if they would go to somebody who's not Jewish and doesn't really understand the whole picture, so they have to do a lot more explaining until they can get the coach to understand what they're dealing with at that moment.
Right. Okay, and how does the coaching connect to your values as a frum woman?
Okay, I love that question. Coaching has gained a lot of popularity in the last 25 years or so. It's become much more, I guess 25 years ago, it was kind of known, but not to the extent that we know about it and hear about it today. And to me, this is really a sign that the world is leaning towards Geula and towards Mashiach, because coaching is very much future oriented. We'll touch on the past, but more like, okay, that's how you saw the past and it didn't, what do you learn from it and how do you go further? And, to me, Mashiach is not just like we'll wake up one day and then Mashiach is here. To me, Mashiach is living a way of Mashiach now, like living in a way of Geula and freedom now. And what does that mean? What does it mean to have a Geula mindset? A Geula mindset means that you become free, you become empowered, you break out of your limitations, you become unstuck. So in order to prepare ourselves for Mashiach, we need to prepare ourselves and our minds to, break free and of the things that are stopping us from realizing our true potential. And really, that's what coaching is about. Coaching is really about helping people, supporting people, helping them tap into their inner wisdom, leaving behind their victimhood, empowering them to reach their potential. And there's a story told about the Baal Shem Tov. When one Rosh Hashanah, it's told that the Baal Shem Tov went up to the heavens, to Shemayim, and he asked Mashiach, Me'emasei kasei mar, when are you going to come? And he was told, Lichsheyafutzu ma'inaisecha chutza, when your well springs will spread outwards. And the more I've been learning about coaching, the more I'm amazed how so many concepts that are taught in coaching and that are becoming accepted in the secular world are all coming from Torah and Chassidus. And the secular world doesn't know where it originates from. But as I learn and hear things, I'm like, wow, look, like this is all Chassidus. This is all coming from Tanya. It's all coming out in the secular world as accepted and normal, that this is the way we should live our lives and, think our lives and do our lives. So that's, to me, quite amazing how all that is coming out and, being accepted, and more secular books are being written with these concepts in mind. So it's, to me, Chassidus, not only in the Jewish world, but the concepts of Chassidus seeping into the whole world around us.
Wow, that's really amazing. I mean, because this is new for me, this coaching, because I've not done such a thing, but to hear that, I mean, I've been busy with other things, and I'm also all the time amazed to see how, everything comes from the Torah. Everything is based in Jewish knowledge. I mean, I can't say everything, but so much of regular life is. I mean, I actually heard a story that's about a woman who teaches colors, brides, before they get married, about Jewish marriage. And she said that she had this young woman coming to her class, and it was clear that the young woman was not interested, but okay, you know, you want to get married, you want to have a chuppah, you need to go to learn. So she comes to this class and she has this attitude of, I'm not interested. But okay, she sits there, and then by the next time the teacher is giving her class, this lady is there again, and this young girl comes over to her and she says, I'm sure you didn't expect me after the way I showed how uninterested I was. She says, well, yes, if you say it, yeah, that's true. So she says, well, when I came back to my fiancé and I told him what I heard about Jewish married life and the laws that concern it, I was telling him, I said, you know, what is this? And he said, he was so surprised. He said, is this really Jewish law? Because he is a therapist, and this is what he's telling his couples that come for marital problems. And he was so surprised to hear that she came to learn that in the color classes. So
Wow.
Yeah, that is how I also see it all the time when I'm, you know, we're all learning, and it comes back and again that the wisdom that Hashem put in the Torah and in all the Jewish books, it's amazing how it's so relevant today.
Yeah, it's Mashiach times. Yeah, definitely. I'll just give you a few examples of like just some, you know, things that for us are basic Hasidic concepts, and then you see them in coaching, like, and it's like, wow, it's like so like sharp, clear. You know, first of all, the idea of the Rebbe talks so many times about leaving our Mitzrayim, leaving our limitations, leaving everything that limits us and breaking out of it. So in the coaching world, the idea of leaving your comfort zone, like that buzzword, comfort zone, it's like, you know, you hear it again and again and again. Another concept of, there's a concept of identity in coaching, where you talk with somebody about who are you, who do you want to be, where do you want to get to. There's the famous story of the Alter Rebbe, where he explained to a high minister how the word, when Hashem asks Adam, Ayeka, where are you? Where are you is really a message for every single person, because the Torah is eternal. So all the messages in the Torah are eternal for all of us. That the Hashem is asking us, each and every one of us, like, who are you? Where are you in the world? What have you accomplished? What are you doing? What do you want to do? And this concept comes back in coaching as well, when you want to guide a person and support a person to reach higher and grow. You also have the idea in Hasidus of tracht gut, wird sein gut, think good, it will be good. Today, the secular world sees so much how thoughts have an effect on your reality, and how believing your thoughts bring about the reality that you want to get or don't want to get, if you're not thinking the thoughts that you need to think. Also, the whole idea of self-care has become very popular in the world, like take care of yourself, be a receiver. The whole idea in Kabbalah, there's an idea in Kabbalah that the woman is the mekabel, the receiver, and the husband is the mashpia, is the giver. Years ago, there was all this talk about feminism and women are equal to men and we're all the same. In more recent years, I've seen books from secular sources saying the opposite, that no, we're not the same, and no, the woman has to be the receiver. And I've read books all about how the woman has to be the receiver, which is like, this woman who wrote the book doesn't realize where it's all coming from. It's all coming from our Torah. Another thing which we saw by the Rebbe always, whenever anybody came to the Rebbe always focused on their strengths. The Rebbe always saw the potential in somebody, and he would push us to reach higher, do more, accomplish more. The Rebbe saw straight through what we're able to do. And in coaching, we are taught that we need to focus on a person's strengths. When someone comes in front of you, you look, what are the strengths? Point out the strengths to the person and use those strengths as a springboard for growth, which is, again, another thing coming from Hasidus, which the world is adopting. So yeah, the idea that just the whole idea that the world is accepting these concepts is to me like, Geula. We're getting ready for the Geula, so our minds are getting ready for the Geula. In order for Mashiach to come, our minds have to be ready too.
Yeah. That's really interesting what you're saying about the Rebbe. The Rebbe would give out dollars on Sunday. And people would stand online for hours until it was their turn. But actually one person asked the Rebbe himself, because if all the people stand for hours, it means that the Rebbe was also standing for hours. So someone asked the Rebbe, like, aren't you getting tired? And the Rebbe said, if you're counting diamonds, you don't get tired. Yeah. And that's really what the Rebbe saw. The Rebbe saw each and every person coming by like a diamond. And even if the diamond is still not totally polished, but the Rebbe saw the potential. Yeah. That maybe there's still some dust that needs to be taken off, but the diamond is there. So that's really what you're saying, what is happening in coaching, how you work in coaching. Yeah. That's really so special. I'm sure you have some more things to share. We're getting close to 9 o'clock. I mean, we could go a little further because the next lesson is canceled, but I was still wondering if you have some more interesting things, like what you have been telling us now has been really so interesting. And I'm sure if you have some more, we would love to hear.
Let me think.
Okay, so in the meantime, I just want to ask, like, there's the people who are watching this, there are people who are watching, right now on Zoom, there are people who are on Facebook, and then there are many people who just watch it afterwards.
Okay.
So it's a very, as we call in Dutch, gemêleerde groep. Okay. Very many different kind of people. What would be your message to the people listening?
Well, I would say that because I've been reading a lot, learning a lot for the last few years, my mind has started to think like a coach. So like a lot of the way I think and believe now is a lot of influenced by what I've learned. One thing that I believe strongly in, what I've seen again and again, is we don't need to believe all our thoughts. So often we get caught up in our thoughts and we start to believe them and believe that they're actually true. And they're really not. They're really not always true. So when you think something, take a look at what you're thinking and ask yourself, is this really true? Because that can so much influence the way you go about your day. So many times we get ourselves stressed because a thought came in our mind and we started to believe it, and it's not even true at all. That's just one thing. Another thing, as a coach, what I tell people is, like, whatever circumstance you find yourself in, you always have some inner power to make your life better. And you don't need to allow people or circumstances to completely take control of your life. We always have some inner power to make ourselves better, to make our lives better. Often it starts with working on our inner, because when we work on our inner selves and our inner emotions, our inner thoughts, that automatically has an effect on the way and on the lens that we're going to view the world around us. And always be open to growing, always be open to learn, to challenge yourself and take on something else when you're able to, when it suits you, whatever your area of interest is. Learn, grow, keep going, no matter where you're holding. and take care of yourselves. No one's going to do it for you. So we all need to, we often think like, oh, if only they'll do this for me and they'll do that for me, but the responsibility lies with us. We can take care of ourselves and just embrace each stage of life and the gifts it has to offer. Every stage of life we're in has something else to give to us, and just embrace that.
Wow, that's so beautiful. Thank you so much. This was very, very inspiring. It feels tempted to make an appointment.
Go ahead. I'm happy to help and support anybody who's listening. So I guess you can ask Sarah for my contact or contact me directly if you have my contact, and there's some way to find my contact.
Okay, thank you so much. And thank you to all the listeners.
Thank you, Sarah, for this continuous interviews that you do every week, and continued Hatzlacha.
Thank you.
Doing.
Thank
Thank you
you
so much.
Thanks a lot.
And
Super.
Chanukah Sameach to everybody.
Chanukah Sameach.
Chanukah.
Thanks a lot. Proud of you.
Thank you.
That was amazing, Nechama Dina.
Thank you.
It was a nachas to listen to you. Yeah. Okay, Hatzlacha Rabba.
Thank you.